Thomas Chen stood in his empty living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes labelled in his meticulous architect's handwriting. Sunlight streamed through uncovered windows, illuminating the pristine white walls of his new home in Oak Ridge Estates. This wasn't how he had imagined his life would unfold, living in a planned community where mailbox designs required approval and fence heights were regulated down to the inch. "You're going to hate the HOA," his friend Marcus had warned when Thomas signed the closing papers. All those rules, all those fees. Thomas had brushed off the concern, enchanted by the community pool, the well-maintained walking trails, and the proximity to his favourite coffee shop. Now, as he flipped through the 3-inch binder of community guidelines left by the previous owners, doubt crept in. Section 4.32. No vehicles may be parked on the street between midnight and 5 a.m. Section 7.15. Holiday decorations must be removed within 7 days of the holiday's conclusion. Section 12.89. Bird feeders require Architectural Review Committee approval. Thomas closed the binder with a sigh. As a freelance architect who had designed unconventional spaces for clients seeking to express their individuality, the concept of conformity felt foreign, even suffocating. His previous apartment had allowed him to paint a mural on his living room wall. Here, he couldn't even choose an unapproved shade of beige for his front door. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Outside stood a woman in her 60s, holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Welcome to Oak Ridge. I'm Eleanor, president of the HOA board." Her warm smile contradicted Thomas's mental image of stern-faced rule enforcers. "Homemade banana bread," she added, handing him the basket. "Board meeting is Thursday at 7 if you'd like to join us. First-time homeowners get priority on the speaking agenda." After she left, Thomas placed the basket on his kitchen counter, the only surface not covered with moving boxes. The gesture was unexpected. He'd anticipated anonymous violation notices, not personal welcomes. Perhaps there was more to this community than regulations and restrictions. That evening, Thomas sat on his back patio, watching neighbours stroll along the community path that wound behind his property. A father taught his daughter to ride a bike without training wheels. An elderly couple walked hand in hand. 2 teenagers collected trash that had blown into the community pond. Thomas sipped his tea, reconsidering. The orderliness he had feared might be constraining could also be the framework that allowed this seeming harmony to exist. The question was whether he could find his place within it, or, better yet, help shape it. Thursday evening arrived faster than Thomas had anticipated. He considered skipping the HOA meeting. Surely unpacking his home office was a legitimate excuse. But Eleanor's welcome had piqued his curiosity. He arrived at the community centre 5 minutes late, slipping into a folding chair in the back row as a man in a golf shirt discussed the quarterly landscaping budget. Thomas had expected a sparse gathering of retirees with nothing better to do. Instead, he found himself among 30 diverse residents, ranging from young families to seniors, all engaged in a surprisingly lively discussion. A woman in scrubs argued for allocating funds to replace playground equipment. A college professor advocated for native plant installations to reduce water usage. A young couple proposed community composting. "Any new homeowners present tonight?" Eleanor asked after the regular agenda items concluded. Thomas reluctantly raised his hand, immediately regretting the attention as heads turned toward him. "Thomas Chen, right? On Willow Lane?" Eleanor smiled. "Would you like to introduce yourself or share any concerns?" Finding himself suddenly standing, Thomas voiced the thought that had been bothering him since moving in. I'm wondering about the restrictions on exterior paint colours. The approved palette seems limited. Instead of the dismissal he expected, several neighbours nodded. A woman with silver-streaked hair added, "I've been saying that for years. Those earth tones were chosen in the 90s. It's time for an update." Eleanor made a notation in her meeting minutes. The Architectural Review Committee could revisit the palette. Any volunteers to research options that maintain neighbourhood cohesion while allowing more expression. To his surprise, Thomas found his hand rising again. 2 other neighbours, the professor and a retired interior designer, joined him. After the meeting, the professor, Samuel, approached Thomas. "Glad you spoke up. The HOA works best when new perspectives join the mix." "I wasn't expecting to get involved so quickly," Thomas admitted. "That's how it happens," Samuel laughed. "You come to complain about one thing and suddenly you're on a committee." Walking home, Thomas reflected on the meeting's dynamics. It wasn't the rigid enforcement system he feared, but rather a mechanism for collective decision-making. The rules weren't carved in stone. They were living guidelines that could evolve with the community's needs and values. The next morning, Thomas found an email from Eleanor containing the committee's meeting schedule and a link to the current design guidelines. He opened his professional colour swatches and began selecting modern options that might complement the neighbourhood's character while expanding its palette. Perhaps there was room to influence the system from within after all. 2 months into his tenure on the Architectural Review Committee, Thomas had reviewed 15 applications ranging from fence installations to patio covers. The experience was proving more nuanced than he'd anticipated. Each Tuesday evening, the committee of 5 gathered in the community centre's conference room, carefully weighing homeowner requests against community standards. Application 37B, announced Margaret, the retired interior designer who chaired the committee. Diane Reynolds requests installation of rooftop solar panels on her south-facing slope. Thomas studied the submitted plans. The panels would be clearly visible from the street, a technical violation of the guidelines that required mechanical equipment to be concealed from public view. The design is sound, Thomas noted, but it conflicts with Section 8.4. Which was written before residential solar was common, added Samuel, the environmental science professor. Times change. Guidelines exist for a reason, countered Frank, a long-time resident. Start making exceptions, and where does it end? Pink houses with purple trim. Thomas found himself mediating between these perspectives. What if we consider this an opportunity to update our guidelines? If sustainability is a community value, shouldn't our rules reflect that? The resulting discussion extended well beyond their usual 1-hour meeting. Thomas sketched potential compromises: partial screening, black frames instead of silver, panel arrangements that minimized visibility while maximizing efficiency. By meeting's end, they had not only approved Diane's request, but drafted a sustainability amendment to the guidelines. Walking home with Samuel afterward, Thomas reflected on the evening. It's a strange position to be in, having authority over your neighbour's property. It's a social contract, Samuel replied. We sacrifice some individual freedom for collective benefit. The trick is finding the right balance. The following week, Diane stopped Thomas while he was retrieving his mail. "Thank you for championing my solar project," she said. "I was prepared for a battle." "The committee is evolving," Thomas explained. "We're trying to be stewards, not obstacles." Later that month, Thomas received his own taste of the process from the other side. His application to replace his wooden fence with a modern horizontal design was returned with a request for modifications. The committee suggested a compromise, maintaining the traditional height and sit back while allowing his preferred material and orientation. Initially frustrated, Thomas eventually recognized the wisdom in their decision. His design would have created an inconsistent streetscape on his corner lot. The modified version preserved his creative vision while respecting the neighborhood's visual flow. Thomas was beginning to understand that well-managed HOAs weren't about uniformity for its own sake, but about thoughtful integration of individual expression within a shared aesthetic. The question wasn't whether rules should exist, but how they should be applied, with rigidity or discernment. The spring storm arrived without warning. Thomas awoke at 3 a.m. to the sound of splitting wood as the massive oak tree in his neighbour's yard succumbed to fierce winds. By dawn, Oak Ridge Estates resembled a disaster zone. Fallen trees blocked roads, power lines dangled precariously, and several homes suffered significant damage from the night's wrath. Thomas stepped outside to assess his property. His architect's eye noted structural damage to his garden shed and fence, but his home remained intact. Others weren't as fortunate. 3 doors down, the Martinez family stood in their driveway, staring helplessly at the massive tree branch that had punctured their living room ceiling. Before Thomas could offer assistance, his phone chimed with a community alert. Emergency HOA response team activated. Community center open as shelter. Those with damage report to incident desk. Volunteers needed. By 8 o'clock, the community center hummed with activity. Eleanor and the board had transformed the space into a command center. A retired contractor coordinated damage assessment teams. A nurse established a first aid station. Residents with chainsaws and trucks organized debris removal crews. "We've activated the emergency reserve fund," Eleanor explained as she handed Thomas a clipboard. "Insurance adjusters are on their way, but we need to document everything. Can you help assess structural damage on Willow and Maple?" Thomas had resented his monthly HOA dues, especially the portion allocated to the rainy day fund, but now understood their purpose. The community wasn't waiting for municipal services. It was mobilizing its own resources, both financial and human. Throughout the day, Thomas witnessed countless acts of neighbor helping neighbor. Samuel coordinated temporary housing for the 2 families whose homes were uninhabitable. Diane, with her new solar panels still intact, offered her electricity to neighbors without power. Frank, the Conservative committee member who deposed the solar panels, now worked alongside Diane distributing bottled water. By evening, as Thomas helped serve a community dinner prepared by residents with functioning kitchens, he realized something profound. The very structure he had initially resisted, the committees, the funds, the communication networks, had created resilience. The HOA wasn't just a rule enforcement mechanism, it was the infrastructure of community itself. "How are you holding up?" Eleanor asked, joining him as he took a brief rest. "I never understood before," Thomas admitted. "The HOA isn't just about property values or aesthetic conformity." Eleanor nodded. "At its best, it's about being prepared, not just for storms like this, but for all the ways we might need each other." In that moment, Thomas saw the invisible connections the HOA had fostered, connections that, in crisis, became lifelines. The yellow notice appeared on community bulletin boards 6 weeks after the storm. Public hearing. Proposed rezoning for Oak Ridge adjacent property. Commercial development. Attached was a developer's rendering of a sprawling retail complex, complete with expansive parking lots and illuminated signage, to be built on the previously wooded land bordering the eastern edge of their community. Thomas studied the notice during his evening walk. The proposed development would increase traffic, create light pollution, and forever alter the character of their neighborhood. Yet, as an individual homeowner, what could he do? His phone rang that evening. It was Eleanor. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. The development proposal affects all of us. The community centre was packed beyond capacity. Residents spilled into the hallway, straining to hear as Eleanor outlined what they knew about Meridian Development Group's plans. The City Council votes in 30 days, she explained. We need a coordinated response. To Thomas's surprise, the HOA had resources already in place. Their bylaws included provisions for legal representation in matters affecting the community. Their reserve fund could be partially allocated to protect property values. Most importantly, they had a unified voice, 400 households strong. We need volunteers, Eleanor announced. Research team, legal team, city council liaisons, and public relations. Thomas joined the research group. His architectural expertise proved valuable as they analysed the environmental impact report, identifying serious flaws in the developer's stormwater management plan. Samuel's environmental science students conducted independent traffic studies. The retired judge who lived on Cedar Lane reviewed relevant zoning precedents. The high school journalism teacher created a community newsletter to keep residents informed. 2 weeks later, Thomas stood before the City Planning Commission. No longer the reticent new homeowner, he presented clear evidence of how the proposed development violated the city's own master plan. Behind him sat dozens of Oak Ridge residents wearing community T-shirts designed by a talented teenager on the PR team. Without our HOA infrastructure, Thomas told Samuel afterward, we'd be facing this giant developer as individuals. That's the point, Samuel replied. HOAs at their best give ordinary homeowners a seat at the table. The night of the City Council vote arrived. The council chambers couldn't accommodate all the Oak Ridge residents who attended. One by one, community members presented researched arguments about traffic safety, environmental concerns, property values, and quality of life. When the council voted to deny the rezoning request, the room erupted in applause. Thomas found himself embracing neighbours he'd barely known months earlier. The HOA hadn't just protected their property values. It had empowered them to protect their community's future and their collective vision of home. 2 years after moving to Oak Ridge Estates, Thomas stood in his backyard surveying the gathering. Neighbours mingled on his patio, while children played on the community playground visible just beyond his property line. The Oak Ridge Design Workshop banner hung from his pergola, and easels displaying concept boards dotted the lawn. Your place looks great, Samuel commented, joining Thomas by the grill. Hard to believe you once worried about expressing yourself within HOA guidelines. Thomas smiled, gesturing toward his home's exterior, now painted in a shade of blue from the expanded colour palette he had helped establish. His horizontal fence design had inspired several neighbours to update their own, creating a fresh yet harmonious streetscape. The native plant garden bordering his property had become a showcase example of the HOA's new water conservation initiative. I've come full circle, Thomas admitted. I moved in fearing the HOA would restrict my creativity. Now I'm hosting an HOA-sponsored design workshop. Eleanor approached, clipboard in hand as always. The community garden proposal is generating a lot of excitement, she reported. 3 families have already volunteered to manage the compost system. The proposed garden would transform an underutilized common area into a productive space where neighbours could grow food, teach children about agriculture, and foster intergenerational connections. The HOA had allocated funds from their community enhancement budget to support the initiative, a budget Thomas now helped oversee as the newest board member. "We've created something special here," Eleanor said, surveying the gathering of neighbours collaborating on community design. "And it's not just about property values." Thomas nodded in agreement. "It's about creating frameworks that allow good things to happen together." As evening approached, Thomas called for everyone's attention. Children were recruited to showcase the design models they had created during the workshop. Miniature community gardens with tiny vegetable plots, benches for gathering, and art installations. "This is what community development really means," Thomas told the assembled neighbours. "Not just maintaining what exists, but imagining what could be together." Later, as the last guests departed, Thomas sat alone on his patio. The journey from sceptical newcomer to community advocate had transformed not just his perception of HOAs, but his understanding of belonging itself. The structures he had initially resisted, the committees, the guidelines, the collective decision-making, had proven to be not constraints but canvases for creating connection. The rules still existed, but Thomas now saw them as the foundation upon which community could be intentionally built. Fluid rather than rigid, evolving rather than unchanging, and ultimately serving the shared vision of those who called Oak Ridge Estates home.